Welcome to this explainer. If you've ever wanted to crack the code on how the world actually operates, well, you're in exactly the right place. Today, we're doing a total masterclass breakdown of how influence and power really work. We're going to strip away all those old assumptions and look straight at the hard data, the academic research, and the literal, real-world tactics used by top-tier executives and massive international political bodies. So, I want you to just think about this for a second. What makes someone truly powerful? Is it having a fancy job title? Is it the amount of money they control? Or is it something way more subtle than that? Because, as we're going to see today, true power isn't just about forcing people to do what you want. It's actually about shaping the very environment where decisions get made. And often, doing it without anyone even realizing it's happening. All right, to ground this explainer in some solid science, we actually need to jump back to a classic 1959 study by social psychologists John French and Bertram Raven. They defined social power super simply. They said it's the potential to change the belief, attitude, or behavior of a person using the resources you have available. Notice that key word there, potential. Power isn't just an action you take, it's an underlying capacity. Think of it like this invisible current that's just constantly running through every single meeting, negotiation, and political summit you'll ever be in.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for the explainer. First, we'll hit the foundations of social power, then move into framing and agenda setting, followed by the strategy of tactical delay. After that, we'll look at executive influence and communication, and finally, wrap up with countering intimidation in negotiations.
Let's kick things off with part 1, Foundations of Social Power. Let's talk about the 6 core bases of social power that dictate almost every human interaction. Now, French and Raven originally gave us 5, and informational power was tacked on a bit later. You've got your coercive and reward power, the classic carrot and stick routine. Then there's legitimate power, which just comes straight from your formal title or position. But think about the others for a minute. Referent power is totally based on charm, respect, and honestly who you know. Expert power stems from your unique skills and experience. And informational power, that's all about holding the exact piece of knowledge someone else desperately needs. Every manager, every politician, and every expert you meet is pulling from this exact menu to exert their sway.
Moving right along to section 2. Framing and agenda setting.
A totally fascinating example of this happens at the macro level inside the Council of the European Union. So the Council uses a rotating presidency, meaning every 6 months, a completely different member state takes the helm. And research shows this rotating presidency wields unbelievable influence using 3 very specific steps. First step is agenda setting, which is where they introduce new issues. Then comes agenda structuring, where they emphasize certain policies over others. And finally, agenda exclusion, where they actively keep topics entirely off the table. They essentially manage the whole legislative output purely by controlling the menu of what even gets discussed. Now, what's really interesting is how this macro-level structuring maps perfectly onto the corporate world. Just like the EU presidency structures the legislative agenda to highlight their own national interests, top professionals use a clever tactic called the executive echo. They almost never pitch ideas totally from scratch. Instead, they structure their new ideas to literally echo existing leadership priorities. Let's say the CEO cares deeply about engagement. Well, a power player is going to frame their brand new reporting tool as an engagement accelerator. It makes the idea feel instantly familiar, right? It naturally aligns with what leadership already wants to buy.
The psychology behind this is known as the framing effect. Most people, they present ideas as flat statements, something like, I think we should do X. But that immediately invites debate and resistance. Executives don't sell ideas, they sell perspectives. So instead, they'll say something like, based on last quarter's bottlenecks, here's how we streamline our decisions. By framing it as the obvious solution to an already accepted problem, they completely bypass resistance. It's wild, but the person who controls the frame absolutely controls the entire conversation. All right, let's look at section 3, the strategy of tactical delay. Going back to our EU example for a moment, researchers studying the rotating presidency have dug into this phenomenon termed ruling by delaying. Remember that third power we talked about, agenda exclusion? Well, if a member state holds the presidency and they strongly oppose a piece of legislation, they don't always fight it head on. That's too risky. They just strategically delay it. They schedule it last on the docket, they request more studies, they basically just let the clock run out on their 6-month term. It is a masterful, totally objective use of procedural power to rule entirely through inaction. And tactical delay works exactly the same way across the board. You see the EU delaying legislation to quietly kill a bill. You see corporate executives intentionally pausing for just a few seconds before answering a question to ramp up tension, which makes their words feel much heavier. And you see negotiators intentionally making you wait, say, 15 minutes in the lobby, just to subtly signal that their time is more valuable than yours. In all three of these scenarios, delay creates this artificial uncertainty and shifts the power dynamic firmly back into their hands. Which brings us to Section 4, Executive Influence and Communication. Okay, this number is a total wake-up call. Research actually shows that once you get beyond middle management, technical skills and sheer hard work only account for about 10% of your career advancement. Seriously, just 10%. A staggering 90% relies on executive presence, strategic communication, and leadership perception. To put that into perspective, if you don't know how to communicate like a leader, simply putting your head down and working harder is just not going to get you a seat at the table. Let's move along and see how this builds directly into what's known as the decoding effect. There's a stark contrast in how people handle information. The average professional steps into a meeting and, well, they over-explain. They give all the backstory, they throw in a ton of jargon, and they build up to their point super slowly, really just hoping to prove their expertise. But an executive, they filter all that out. They lead with the conclusion. They make the answer sound completely inevitable. They don't say, here are 20 data points that might suggest a shift. No, they say, the market is shifting. If we don't act, we fall behind. They deliver crystal clear clarity, not complexity. And when they do get challenged, power players use something called answer redirection. Think about it. If someone asks why sales dropped, your average employee usually gets super defensive and tries to justify the past. An executive, though, they rarely just answer the exact question that was asked. They pivot. They'll say, well, what's really important here is how we're setting up for a massive Q2. See what they did? They subtly shift the narrative to suit their own agenda, ensuring they never, ever lose control of the room's focus. Now for our final piece, Section 5, Countering Intimidation in Negotiations. So we've seen the playbook. We know how the game is actually played. But I want you to ask yourself, how do you currently react when you feel the room turning against you? Do you start talking faster? Do you kind of shrink back in your chair? To ground these abstract concepts into real, actionable advice, we're drawing on the brilliant tactics of global sales and negotiation expert Gabriele Reebok. She has faced down these exact intimidation strategies in high-stakes environments, and she knows exactly how to beat them. First things first, you counter physical pressure with physical resets. When you're being intimidated, your body triggers a literal physiological stress response. Reebok suggests conscious breathing, specifically exhaling longer than you inhale to literally calm your nervous system down in real time. Before you even walk into the meeting, adopt a victory posture to boost your confidence. Once you're in the room, physically take up space, spread your notes out a bit. And if the other side is just totally dominating the agenda and you feel like you're losing control, simply call for a tactical bio break. Seriously, stepping out to the restroom is a brilliantly simple yet highly effective way to force a hard reset on the meeting's momentum. And always remember, none of this intimidation is personal. It's purely a tactical game. Now, what about that weapon of time we talked about earlier? When someone hits you with an impossible 24-hour deadline just to induce panic, you have to push back. Diffuse the time pressure by attempting to renegotiate that deadline, leveraging your own legitimate power in the situation. If you absolutely can't change the timeline, immediately isolate the mandatory elements that benefit you first, so you don't end up making panicked concessions. You have to recognize that the anxiety you're feeling from being delayed or rushed is very often just artificial uncertainty, designed entirely to make you fold. You also need to be hyper-aware of your own emotions. So, the crucial point here is that Reebok warns the absolute most dangerous emotion in a negotiation isn't fear, and it isn't anger. It's actually relief. When a team hits you at the classic good cop, bad cop routine, the bad cop tears you down, right? Then the good cop steps in with this warm, sympathetic smile. The intense surge of relief you feel in that moment makes you incredibly vulnerable. It tricks your brain into making massive, unnecessary concessions just to keep that good cop happy. You've got to recognize the play and keep your guard up. We have covered a lot of ground today, all the way from the legislative halls of the EU to the psychology of the corporate boardroom. But I want to leave you with one final thought to take into your very next meeting. Think back to those 6 bases of power we looked at. Which base of power do you rely on most? And honestly, more importantly, which one are you leaving completely untapped? Start experimenting a little, take up your space, and just see how the energy in the room changes. Thanks so much for watching.